Despite being as old as the PlayStation, SD Gundam Chi Generation is a series that has remained away from Western eyes until recently. Mashing together the universes of countless Gundam stories, it serves as a sandbox of sorts where the player can guide their favorite characters and mobile suits to victory. Throughout its history, Chi Generation has had two styles of games. Tom Create developed most of them, as well as SD Gundam Emotional Jam. Starting in 2000 with Chi Generation Gather Beat, a company called Vanguard was responsible for this Vanguard or Gather Beat style, inheriting Emotional Jam's mechanics. This style features crossover stories with original characters and plot points as the centerpiece connecting everything else. The most recognizable of these titles is Mono Eye Gundams, and indeed you'll see a cameo here in Cross Race. But Cross Race isn't part of this lineup, which has been silent since 2007 with Cross Drive, which has nothing to do with Cross Race. Why does it have to be so confusing? But the predominant style is developed by Tom Create. This style typically recreates stories from the source material, although a few of them do include some crossover and even original plot. Despite the ironic name, Cross Race has no crossover plot. Instead, it focuses on four specific timelines. First is After Colony. In order to fight back against the tyrannical Earth government, the space colonies prepare a secret plan to send 5 highly advanced mobile suits down to the surface. The Gundams and their pilots end up getting mixed up in the affairs of the Sank Kingdom, which advocates for peace above all else, and the mysterious organization of the Zodiac, pulling the strings behind the scenes. The Cosmic Era covers the conflict between normal humans and the genetically modified coordinators. Two former friends find each other on opposite sides during an operation to steal the Earth Federation's shiny new mobile suits, escalating to all-out war. Meanwhile, a junk dealer and a mercenary discover a set of prototype mobile suits connected to the supposedly neutral country of Orb. Anno Domini explores the problems brought by revolutionary new energy sources. Celestial Being, a ragtag group of well-intentioned terrorists and autistic Gundam humpers, announce their mission to eradicate war by performing armed interventions against naughty boys. It makes sense in context. A major theme in these stories is communication and how conflicts happen because people aren't open to understanding each other or unknown species they might encounter in the future, like space needles. The final timeline is post-disaster, taking place long after a catastrophe wiped out nearly all of humanity. In Mars, a group of orphans are forced to slave away under precarious conditions. One day, after being tasked with escorting a VIP, the institution is attacked. The orphans use the opportunity to rebel against their slave masters and thus establish the Tekadan. The story follows the wild ride that awaits them as they chase their dreams and face off against the corrupt alliance of Gjallarhorn. Oh, and when I covered Lost Heroes a while ago, I mentioned the SD Gundam sub-series, where the mobile suits are actual living beings. SD Gundam Chi Generation simply uses an SD style for its graphics, although the SD Gundam sub-series does make an appearance every once in a while. And god, that was a long summary, so I hope you understand why I don't want to wait before covering this game. And after taking over 250 hours of my life, I think Cross Race earned the right to pop my YouTube cherry this year. Cross Race is a turn-based strategy RPG where the player and the AI take turns smacking each other with pew-pews and light sticks. You start with a handful of horribly weak units and characters, but as you acquire doge and experience points, your little party grows bigger and stronger. You can choose from any of the included stories and advance at your own pace. Every stage has a trigger for a historic moment, advancing to the second part, and a secret mission, resulting in extra enemies with more abilities you can acquire. Many stages also feature a prologue with a set of fixed units and a challenge mission that earns you extra score, which then gets converted to money. On the home screen, you can access the organization menu to prepare up to 4 groups. Warship groups are the standard Chi generation setup, in which you have a warship with 6 crew members, 1 master unit and up to 2 teams, each with a leader and 3 squad members. Characters and units have their own stats and abilities, which can be enhanced in a variety of ways. Most units can also be assigned a sub-flight system, providing them a different set of terrain rankings and movement distance, useful for units that can't normally move in the atmosphere or space. Outside of certain abilities, units don't naturally restore HP or energy while deployed. Instead, you send them back to their warship for a complete recovery. Energy has always been a very limited resource in the series, especially since there are no ammo-based weapons, so managing it effectively plays a big role. Warship captains can also utilize their crew members' set skills 9 times per stage. These are learned by characters as they level up, and provide effects like recovering energy or increasing evasion. New in Cross Race is Warship Link-Up, where currently deployed units within the warship's area, the colored squares around it, join the warship to attack up to 9 enemies for horribly unbalanced amounts of damage. The more friendly units are available, the more enemies it can target. Master units regenerate HP and energy every turn and can use the group's available skills. During the player phase, master units can also call for support attacks from every other unit within its master area, shown by the purple squares around it. Team leaders have their own area, where the teamwork fun times happen. While inside their leader's respective area, members of the team can join up with each other, performing support attacks to join in on the ass beating, or performing a support defense to take damage in place of the targeted ally. The support mechanics might seem a bit overwhelming if you've never touched the series, but it won't take long until you get the hang of it and unleash mass butt destruction with your army of perfectly sane pilots and totally harmless robotos. Cross Race also brings a fresh new concept to the series: raid groups. With these, you don't need a warship. Instead, the group members recover HP and energy depending on their position relative to each other. It's actually quite intuitive as well, with the interface telling you the effects of their position. Raid groups can perform support attack and defense just like warship groups, but their members can also initiate a raid link-up, which is kind of their version of warship link-up. Once per turn, any member can target multiple enemies within the area of any of the group's units. It doesn't matter if they are on the other end of the map. If the enemy is within an ally's area, they can get blasted in the face. Unlike warship groups, any member of a raid group can use skills 5 times per stage, but are limited to only their own, and the effects can only be applied to themselves. Raid groups are quite versatile compared to warship groups, and given how expensive warships are, you're probably going to use one for a bit anyway. But they have one major setback: limited deployment slots. The number you can deploy depends on the stage, and only a few actually lets you deploy the maximum of 8 units. This means that the number of targets for raid link-ups is limited as well. And make no mistake, enemies are capable of taking down your Walmart clearance sale trash cans in a few hits, and will start taking advantage of support attacks and warship link-ups in higher difficulties. The good old concept of kill them before they kill you does wonders here, because did I mention that units are gone for good if they go down? Because they do. So yeah, supports, they're pretty cool. Support defense also goes together with the MP gauge, which you can think of as morale or similar. Getting hit or missing attacks lowers it, while dodging attacks or taking down enemies increases it. Drop it low enough and the pilot won't be able to act, but that basically never happens, so who cares. The fun part is that filling it up makes the pilot enter super high tension, enabling the usage of certain weapons and making every attack deal a critical hit. Take down an enemy in this state and the pilot gets supercharged, turning every hit into a super critical, but resetting the MP bar if the unit takes a hit. And while critical damage has been getting nerfed significantly in the last few games, it is still a very useful bonus that you will want to keep active for as long as possible, so support defense comes in handy. Why let your ace reset their MP bar when you have a merry band of meat shields at your disposal? Speaking of nerfs, another mechanic in the series is Chance Step, letting units move again after taking down an enemy. Older games raised the number of times you could do this as the pilot's level increases, but Cross Race sets it as 2 extra moves regardless, only changing with specific modifications. On the organization menus, you can also perform all kinds of enhancements and upgrades and stuff. One of the key elements is the large selection of mobile suits, which can develop into others once they reach a certain level. This registers the unit into the production list, from which you can spend capital to build as many as you want. The previous game also implemented the get gauge, allowing you to register guest units by letting them take down enemies to fill it. And this time, it doesn't reset after the stage. Another way to get units is by having warships or raid units capture surrendering enemies, indicated by the white flag. Although the scope of this is quite limited in Cross Race. You can pretty much only force enemies to surrender by destroying the warships they came from, while previous games had other options like defeating the leader of the secret units. Depending on various factors, such as current stats and equipped modifications, individual units also have an exchange value, determining what units show up in the exchange screen. As the name implies, you trade your unit for a different one. This doesn't register it into the production list, however. There is no shortage of methods for acquiring new suits, so you get drip-fed new content all the time. Aside from a few examples of recycling and color variations, every unit has its own set of animations that range from pretty okay to butt-clenchingly awesome. Amazing what 3 years of development can do for your game. Some animations are so good that the really stiff result animations look seriously out of place. Cross Race stepped the hell up in terms of music too. Back in World, a lot of cool BGMs were cut short or removed, and you were left with a ton of inappropriately boring tracks. Overworld slapped a band-aid on this with a custom BGM feature, which Genesis then removed. And Cross Race brings it back. Assuming you're not playing on Switch. But you can now change every character's BGM on a per weapon basis. Cross Race does recycle a bit from older games, but the new side stories required new compositions, and all the new stuff is absolutely excellent. The only failure here is that the base game series still haven't gotten arrangements of their theme songs since Wars in 2009, and Stargazer could really use one. The rest of the presentation won't win any awards, but for the most part it's all visually pleasing, like the profile pictures making the most generic of grunts look stylish as balls. It's all in the little touches, like the Graces grinding their axe, or the Zakus striking poses before stuffing someone with explosives, and the different timelines have their own visual and sound quirks in their weapons and equipment. This applies to gameplay as well. For example, most post-disaster units have physical weapons and the nano-laminate armor ability, greatly reducing damage from the beam weapons common to the other timelines. Cosmic Era instead has phase shift armor, decreasing damage from physical weapons. This all pushes the player to experiment and try out all different kinds of mobile suits. Some people would say that your enjoyment of G generation depends on how familiar you are with the source material, but I would argue that it's just as enjoyable if you're not, because you're discovering new things, and eventually you'll stumble upon new favorites that you have never seen before. And ultimately it doesn't even matter if your favorite units suck balls at level 1, because with enough love and care they too can one day break the Geneva Conventions. Weaker units get more upgrade points in total too, letting their stats keep up with those of higher tier suits. Same thing applies to characters. You can make peaceful characters into killing machines. You can create an army of crazy bastards. You can even have multiple versions of the same character, with all the paradoxes and anachronisms you could ever wish for. The game also features a rather simplistic custom character function, letting you pick from 8 male or female designs, a birth date that determines their abilities and skills, and a nice selection of voice actors. Write a profile, set a BGM, and enjoy your autistic OC Donut steals. Characters have slots for learning new abilities on top of those they start with. They are acquired by setting them when the character takes down an ability holder, which is free, or by teaching them any that you have in stock, which costs money. Units can be equipped with up to 3 modifications, granting effects like improved stats or damage barriers, or stopping them from gaining XP. I'm sure some absolute mavericks will find a use for that. Modifications are unlocked by completing quests, which is also how you unlock characters for scouting and a handful of units. These are optional objectives that can be cleared in various ways, from simply completing a certain stage to defeating an enemy with a certain character. While units earn upgrade points to spend on the 5 base stats, characters get direct stat increases as they level up. Previously, they earned ace points by defeating enemies, but in Cross Race you spend money instead, which totally can't be abused to break the game in half, no sir. Merry Christmas, asshole! Dispatch missions are another completely new addition, letting you send up to 3 groups to do something for a number of real-life hours. Each one has optional conditions that can increase the achievement rate, earning you bigger, better rewards. Dispatch missions come dangerously close to mobile game mechanics, but I appreciate getting some progress done when I'm busy with less important things like socializing or going outside. And you can always use the cooldown tokens to make it go faster. But overall, the developers made a fun game that they can be absolutely proud of, and I'm willing to bet that everyone involved had fun with it themselves. You can tell from the joyful stuff like Graham being a real ham, or how combining 2 zeros gives you... Oh, you cheeky cunt. Now let's talk balance. No game is perfect, no matter how much I preferably suck its big metal rod, and it's no secret that the Chi Generation series has always had trouble with balance and difficulty. Cross Race is a decent step forward, but it still misses the mark. Since you have so many choices in terms of team building, you could say that the player makes their own difficulty. Running a team of low-tier suits will of course be harder than a team of endgame powerhouses. The obvious problem here is that the player can repeat stages as many times as they want. You could rush to the end, or you can take your time. Or you can even end up powerful enough to breeze through everything, and there is only so much that the higher difficulties can do. You can spend capital to raise pilot stats, you can have as many copies of powerful units as you want to, and enemies just don't scale up enough as you approach the end. There are tons of things you can do to break the game in half, in case Warship Link-Ups didn't do that by themselves. Maybe not locking hell difficulty behind clearing the game would help. Maybe a bit of level scaling too, as long as it's not the kind that makes you feel like you never get stronger than the enemies. I don't know. But being perfectly honest, I think some of the balancing quirks work in the game's favor, given that a lot of the appeal is being able to take any unit and make it a killing machine. I like a challenge as much as the next popcorn ball, but if the game was so hard that it would be impossible to beat unless the player deployed armies of Quantas and Winged Zeros, then it would technically be harder but not more enjoyable. This is a problem that exists in many sandbox type of games. A similar example is the mainline Pokemon series, which has typically been easy peasy one-hit blissy. Aside from utter embarrassments like Gen 1 or the Hoenn remakes, the difficulty lets you use pretty much any Pokemon without much fuss. Obviously I'm going to extremes to demonstrate a point, but what I want to say is that the perfect difficulty should challenge all options available to the player, not limit them to a select few. There's a lot to be said about difficulty in video games, but not in this video. Let's move on. On a somewhat related note, the pilot abilities you get tend to be kind of bland because most of them are just stat bonuses and the fun stuff is locked behind hell difficulty, so post-game only. Another complaint could be thrown at the way some of the stories are presented. Naturally, you're getting an abridged version, but some important scenes are kind of glanced over and come rather abruptly, like when the 15-year-old kid who liked playing the piano gets sliced in half by a laser. Hell yeah, dude! The paid DLC is also overpriced as balls. $50 for the game is a very fair price given how much content you get, but half of that for about 10% of the amount of content at most is kind of taking the piss. All you get is a bunch of dispatch missions and a handful of units, characters, abilities and BGMs, and you don't get things like the H1's alternate forms, and like 3D and Overworld. If you got at least one full stage out of it, then it would be an easier pill to swallow. Besides that, I just have some little niggles or oddities to talk about, like the fact that you only have one save slot this time around, or how the list of ability holders for a few stages contains spoilers, or how it would be nice if a certain few animations could be skipped or sped up even more. A handful of pre-deployment missions lean a bit too hard on the luck and trial and error side of things too, particularly on the 00 story. On the other hand, the secret enemies are almost always just more grunts, while the previous games usually took the opportunity to throw in less common units. Would also be nice to have more variety in custom character designs. Hell, there are a few from previous games that could straight up be recycled. On the bright side, modding in new sprites is pretty easy. There are a few cases of separate characters that have the exact same lines when they could have just been alternate costumes for a single one. And then there are different versions with fully working portraits and cut-ins that only show up in specific stages, which seems like a massive waste. Some animations have noticeable shimmering. It's pretty minor in most cases, but a bit distracting in a few. Running the game at higher resolutions won't help, because despite what it looks like, the animations are actually pre-rendered videos, not 3D models being rendered in real time. The last nitpick isn't a problem with the game itself, but the English translation could use some more polish. There are honest mistakes, probably due to the translators not knowing the context, but also misleading or straight up wrong descriptions, like when attack hits being translated as when attack is critical. You should also keep in mind that, even though Cross-Race is available on the PS4 and Switch, the Western release is PC only. There's also a premium G-Sound edition that includes the original vocal versions of theme songs as selectable BGMs in-game, but it's Japan exclusive, likely due to licensing costs. But you can just use the custom BGM function for that on PC anyway. And on that note, it seems like the Switch port has a few performance issues and tends to crash sometimes. The PC version launched with a ton of game-breaking bugs like crashes and units dealing several times more damage than they should. The developers probably uploaded the wrong build by accident and it got fixed like 2 hours later. Besides the occasional stutter on the result scenes, it runs smooth for me and even supports high frame rates, but some people have problems with integrated GPUs and it would be irresponsible of me to recommend it without mentioning that. I also appreciate the effort, but you should seriously use a controller instead of keyboard and mouse. Finally, let's be clear here. This game is not for everyone. If you're the kind of person who values new experiences over a repetitive gameplay loop, you might not enjoy this game. The cheat generation games are very much grindy sandboxes, and Cross-Race is no exception. But if you want a game that lets you lay back and immerse yourself in it for hundreds of hours, then Cross-Race is a very compelling choice. There is something very appealing in the idea of having a large selection of characters and units to play with, and to slowly make them as powerful as possible. Cheat generation has mastered the art of grinding, and I wouldn't have it any other way.